Someone keeps knocking at my door late at night. In June of this year, I moved out of my parents' apartment as I finally got a steady job and longed for some sort of freedom. I looked for apartments that were affordable in my city and found one that's a 2 or 3 minute walk from my parents' apartment. To me, it was perfect. I'd get to live alone and my parents would still be nearby, so I could visit them whenever I wanted to pop in to have breakfast with them. The apartment itself was great. It's not really much to look at, but for a single male, it's more than enough. My apartment has a long corridor connecting each room together from the sides, with my front door being at the start of the corridor. My bedroom is the second room on the left, but since the walls are pretty thin, you can literally hear people in the apartment complex, walking, talking, etc. from my bedroom, and any room for that matter. Last week, I came home from the pub after meeting up with a few friends. It wasn't really late, around 10:15 or 10:30ish, and I had a day off, so I took a shower and hopped into bed to watch Netflix. It was probably around midnight when I heard a faint knock coming from the front door. I stopped the show that I was watching and listened for a minute or so and just thought that it was my mind playing tricks on me. I continued watching Netflix when once again, I heard a 2-motion knock on my door. I sat up from bed, went to the door, and looked through the peephole, and sure enough, it was pitch black. I once again shrugged it off and went back to my room, but before I could even sit down properly, I heard it slightly louder. At this point, I thought it was my friends playing a prank on me, so I called my friend and asked if he was knocking on my door, and if he was, it wasn't amusing. He paused for a second and said, "Dude, I'm at home. I have to be up at like 7:30. I believed him and hung up the phone. I was talking pretty loudly, so whoever was knocking probably heard me, and as soon as I hung up, I heard another knock. At this point, I was pretty pissed off, so I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and saw nothing. I then unlocked the door and took a peek, then closed the door and locked it. Me being angry and a bit intoxicated, I decided to wait and catch whoever was knocking, so I spent a solid 10 minutes silently looking through the peephole before being a bit startled as someone put their hand over the peephole and knocked again. I immediately started unlocking the door and ran out to the apartment hall. I heard someone booking it down the steps and heard him lean against the wall as his jacket shrugged the wall, so I ran a few steps down before realizing whoever this is was waiting behind a corner to get the jump on me. I hurried back inside and called the cops. They were there within a few minutes, scanned the building and the street, but couldn't find anyone. They told me that it could just be some kids pulling a prank and to never run after someone. They kept a patrol car around the entire night and the knocking stopped. It could have been some kids being dumb, but the part that gave me the fucking creeps was the fact that whoever it was ran down the stairs and stopped behind the corner. He didn't keep running. If it were some pranksters, I find it more likely that they would have just booked it outside. As I said, it's been a week and the knocking stopped. It kept me on edge for a few days because I just expected to be jumped by someone when walking into my apartment, but so far, nothing has come of it. But I've let it go at this point and just hope that it won't happen again. Narrowly avoided being murdered. This is a story of someone I knew and had cut ties with because he was a fucking psycho. The first half will be to add context as to why I cut him off, and the second half is what makes it a Let's Not Meet. I don't know if he uses Reddit, so I'll omit ages and locations. It started about 4 years ago when I was living in a friend's house while attending a nearby university. It was myself, my friend, his sister, and their parents. Roughly about 2 weeks into staying there, my friend's sister invited her boyfriend to live in the house too, and by all accounts, he was a pretty cool guy at first, very sociable and full of great stories. We often sat around the table for drinks and talked about life, having a smoke in the garden. Within the first month, however, cracks started to show in this veneer. He would rant about government conspiracy, how he was always a wronged party, he was big into Sigma male bullshit, and martial arts, and Christ did he have a temper. He had this big dog he always kept in a cage that was extremely violent when he wasn't around. The dog attacked his girlfriend and had to be put down. That's when the guilt trips towards her began, and the ranting became incessant. About 2 months later, he had the bright idea to live in a shipping container. mainly because the parents wanted him out and dragged his girlfriend along for the ride. I'm not talking about one of those cheap little restoration jobs. This was a rented container in a storage yard among the outskirts of the town we were living in. He would intimidate and threaten the staff there constantly until they called the police. This, of course, was another conspiracy. He became increasingly abusive to his girlfriend to the point where the family got involved to get her out of there. I stuck close to them, having pretended to be on his side until we could safely get her out. They broke up, which he blamed me for, claiming I was poisoning her against him to make her mine. She has a new partner now and they're happy. We all blocked the Psycho X on everything possible, but he continued to harass them until he eventually disappeared. Or so we thought. Fast forward to last year, I started to receive messages over social media from different accounts, blocking each one in turn when I discovered who it was. Some friendly and some hostile. One of these profiles, however, was pretending to be someone I knew from university. We talked about life and how things were going. Eventually, I was invited to a house party, claiming it was a free house and plenty of people were coming. I booked the time off work, made my travel plans, and kept talking to this friend, coming up to the date of the party. I mentioned it to my friend's sister, and she was interested in going herself, until I mentioned the address. Then she panicked. The address in question was a property belonging to the crazy ex's father that was scheduled for sale. I waited until the day of the party and called the police to check the property, claiming a suspected break-in. They found 5 people in there, including the ex. Parked out front was a butcher's van, equipped with food for storage and a collection of knives, hammers, and rope. I'm glad I didn't go. Someone tried to break into my house and find me. This story happened 3 years ago, around the time that COVID started, so it was a while back, but still worthy of a post. It was early 2020, and I had just gotten a new job in a small town near my area. While looking for a place to live, my sister offered to rent her house to me. She had bought the house 2 years prior, but she and her husband didn't really take to it, and their commute to work was long, so they moved out and the house was uninhabited. Luckily for me, it was actually pretty close to my workplace, and my sister pretty much rented it for free to me. I had just paid the water and electricity and looked after the house. I was living there for a solid 2 or 3 months and had already gotten used to it, but one night after coming back from work and parking my car, as I walked towards my door, I noticed something odd. There was a cigarette butt on the curb to my house. I leaned down and picked it up, thinking that it might have been mine since I'm a smoker, but after looking at the brand name, I realized that it wasn't mine and threw it away. I didn't think much of it and just shrugged it off as some asshole throwing it at my curb. So I went on with my night and nothing unusual happened. 2 days later, I was once again walking to my house when I spotted a few more cigarette butts, this time near my porch. Needless to say, I was pissed off and thought that someone sat on my porch and smoked, but since I don't know who it was, there was nothing I could do about it. I noticed that they were put out pretty recently, so whoever it was probably walked off as I was approaching. That night, I was watching a movie on my laptop, and it was pretty late, past 1 a.m., so I was surprised when I heard a car passing by. It's a suburban neighborhood, and it was COVID, so people rarely ventured out at night, but I didn't think much of it. Around half an hour later, I was surprised when I heard chattering nearby. I listened intently, but I couldn't hear what they were talking about, as their voices seemed almost muffled and quiet. By this point, I was getting a bit unnerved, so I stopped the movie and quietly got off my sofa and walked to the front door to make sure that it was locked. As I was approaching the door, I froze mid-step as I heard the two approaching my door and reducing their talking to a whisper. I realized right away that whoever this was wanted to break in. I leaned against my door and waited, expecting a loud bang against the door or the doorknob being shaken, but it was oddly quiet. I decided to walk over to the window to see if they had walked away or changed their minds. My windows have bars from the inside out that you have to unlock so that you can move the curtains or look out of the window comfortably. I slowly unlocked the bar mechanism and lifted it up. I moved the curtains and was taken aback. Leaning up against my window was a man. He was as startled as I was because he basically stuttered over his own steps as he jumped back. He tightened his hoodie to cover his face, so all I could really see was his big blue eyes looking at me. His friend realized what was going on, and right away started to kick the door in. He kicked it a solid 4 or 5 times, but the door wouldn't budge. All the while, I was staring at them frozen in fear, trying to comprehend the situation. I snapped out of it and slammed the bars over the window, locking them and running up the stairs to the storage room where I pushed the table up to the door and called the cops. As I listened, I expected the two to come inside any minute, as I heard a loud crash from the bars of the window being shaken aggressively. When they realized that they couldn't get in, one of them let out a long, angry scream that probably woke up half the neighborhood. By the time the cops came, they were long gone. The police couldn't find out who it was, but were more active in the neighborhood in the following weeks. Regardless, I wasn't keen on staying there, so shortly after I moved out. My sister sold the house a few months later, and as far as I know, nothing similar ever happened since. I honestly don't know what they wanted, or why they were so determined to get in, but whoever it was, let's not meet again. They came to my apartment after harassing me for months. The timeline of all of this begins in spring 2019 and concludes in November 2019. It only occurred to me recently that this story would be appropriate for this sub. It's easily the wackiest and creepiest interpersonal situation I've ever experienced, and it took an absurdly long time to unravel. From the beginning, I felt like a detective trying to suss out the identity of my harasser. In the end, when all of the pieces rapidly fell together, my head was spinning, and I was overwhelmed with confusion, betrayal, and an ominous sense that I may have been spared from something much worse. Let's begin. I had a friends with benefits relationship with a guy named Judah, beginning in 2018. He came along one of those doomed, let's open our relationship as a last-ditch efforts to not break up relationships, and I enjoyed his presence, but didn't necessarily feel a deep connection. My relationship with Judah tapered off, amicably, with our interactions becoming limited to liking each other's Tumblr posts and occasional Snapchats. After a while of no interaction, Judah contacted me for some writing advice. I wanted to be genuinely useful, so I wrote a few paragraphs of heartfelt constructive feedback. He thanked me for my input, and after that point, our interactions ceased. Not long after I had written this out, I had begun receiving some vicious anonymous messages on Tumblr. The first few were insulting my appearance and my art-making ability. I shrugged it off. Random trolls are common as gnats at this point. I didn't think anything of it. The messages continued rolling in, and they began to become more and more disturbingly specific. The harasser began to imply that he knew where I lived, and dropped that they knew what school I went to, which wasn't information readily available on my blog. At this point, I knew that I had to be receiving them from someone that I knew in real life, or from a creep who was dedicated enough to figure out my full name from the clues on my blog. Difficult, but not impossible. It was at this point that I began to suspect Judah. Extremely few people from my real life knew my Tumblr URL, and he was the only person I could guess with any motive of jealous harassment, since we weren't talking anymore. I didn't think he was the type of person to act like that, but crazy people can be very talented in hiding their crazy. I blocked him on all social media, and assumed that I'd be moving on with my life. Wrong. The messages became more frequent and creepier. They began making fun of my disabilities and threatening physical attacks. A common theme among the messages was about how being disabled makes me useless and undesirable. Strangely, Christianity kept being brought into it, as they claimed that my illness was the result of God's punishment. I had started to dread whenever a new message icon appeared, so I turned off anonymous messaging. But this measure did not prevent me from further harassment, because this began a series of dedicated harassment accounts, with the first few messages coming from brand new accounts called Asshole Chaos Bringer. The tone of the interactions began to turn noticeably more occult. The messages started talking about how Lord Satan is displeased with me. I blocked this account. From this, I became more confident that it was a single person sending me all these messages, despite the fact that they had tried to sound as if they were coming from different sources. Hateful messages were, and still are, exceedingly rare for me, and there was clearly a person very dedicated in trying to freak me out. I suspected Judah even more, but didn't have enough evidence, and didn't choose to confront him. After blocking Asshole Chaos Bringer, I began receiving messages from another shiny new account, Asshole Chaos Bringer 2. The messages from this account truly take the cake of bad shittery. I'm attaching screenshots because although this is quite a work of creative writing, I wasn't the one who made it up. I really don't want to have to bring this curse down, but you know, the demons got me, and I have to do their bidding, or else I'm the one getting hurt. I hope you understand. I'm so sorry for all of this. I'm so sorry. The abyss demands balance and justice for what you've done. I'm so very sorry. I almost feel bad that the demons I work for have been telling me to torment you so much. You already are the way you are. Isn't that torment enough? I almost feel some mercy, but this energetic warfare isn't over yet. Tonight, on this full moon, things will get crazy, and maybe I'll try to get the demons to leave you alone, although all they want is to eat your soul. You poor, tormented little thing, hiding in false confidence and false power. We pity you, truly. I pray you have protection methods. I wasn't moved by their prose, and blocked this account as well. There was one more account created to harass me, after which I assumed this person ran out of email addresses. A little while later, after a period of silence from this person, I decided to turn on anonymous messages again. To my dismay, shortly after I changed the setting back, hate messages started trickling back in, using the same language I've come to expect from my usual harasser. At one point I received a heartfelt apology, apparently from the same person who had been writing the other hateful messages. However, one day later, after I'd posted their apology, they instantly backtracked and started up the harassment again. However, at the same time, I began getting anonymous messages from someone who said they noticed from my photos that we lived near each other. They said they were interested in becoming friends, but were too shy to reveal themselves. I gently prodded this person to message me from their actual account, and they eventually did. This person introduced themselves as Elm. They were a non-binary person who was new to the area and did not know many people outside of their work. We chatted for a bit and found some common ground. They were way more spiritual than I was, but I'm not disinterested in that kind of thing, so we talked about our individual theologies. Their spirituality set off a little red flag. I suspected that perhaps they could have been the one who sent the curse message, so I asked the question as a test. Do you know much about astrology? Previous messages had made extensive use of my birth charts when insulting me. They responded, barely. So I breathed a little sigh of relief and marked them off as safe in my head. Since this harassment was still an issue to me at the time, I decided to tell them about it. In response, they said, Jesus, that's honestly kind of scary. I'm sorry you've got some bitter person coming out your throat. Anyways, after a few days, I had begun to consider this person a friend. We weren't the most compatible, but they were having a rough time, and I had the time and resources to help them out. After a bit, we decided to meet up. My usual weed man had run dry, and they had somebody that I could buy from. So I agreed to pick them up at their place, and we would go get the pot and then chill at mine. They met me at their apartment's leasing office, which they claimed was because they needed to pay rent. We picked up the weed and went back to my apartment. We ended up driving way longer than expected, due to being given a wildly incorrect address. Therefore, I was unexpectedly tired by the time we arrived at my apartment. On the way to my apartment, they tripped and fell, twisting their ankle. I offered them an ankle compress to mitigate the injury, and they took it. We smoked and chatted for a while. The interaction was normal, maybe a little awkward. Elm had a manic energy, which would seem to randomly flap, after which they'd snap back to their frenetic disposition. My exhaustion from the extra long drive cut our hangout short, because I had to drive them home before I became too exhausted to operate a car safely. They seemed kind of disappointed. I assumed this was just because we had only hung out for a short time. I dropped them off back at home, and had a generally positive regard for Elm afterwards. I never saw that ankle compress again. The anonymous messages began to dry up, although I still got them, and they were still nasty. I messaged Elm occasionally. I was intending to take them to a nearby formal garden. Then, suddenly, I got a message from Elm. They said they just didn't have enough in common, and that they weren't interested in being friends with me anymore. I was taken aback by this, and a little hurt. I had never experienced a friend breaking up with me like that, yet I still didn't feel suspicious of them. By absolute coincidence, on the same day, My best friend Monica logged into her Tumblr account for the first time in over a year. She had received hateful messages, dated to spring 2019, that were clearly from the same person that had been harassing me. This felt like the nail in the coffin as far as damning evidence against Judah. There was precisely one mutual friend that knew the Tumblrs of both Monica and me, and it was him. With that, I felt confident to proceed with confronting him. Immediately, he claimed he knew nothing about the messages, and I wasn't surprised that he'd deny it, so I pressed on. However, he mentioned something that caught my attention. He knew that his partner had sent hateful messages to me after I had written that writing advice. Apparently, they had gotten jealous after learning about our past relationship. I checked his latest Instagram post, and my heart sank. I said, "Wait, is your partner Elm?" He said, "Yeah, they are, but they insist they have nothing to do with what you're getting now." I said, "There's something fucked up here, really fucked up. I find it very, very strange that they met me without ever letting on that they were involved with you. And just today they said they can't be friends anymore." At this point, I assume it was Judah's heart that sank. He asked me some more clarifying questions, and I told him the timeline of our meeting and let him know that I had given them my ankle brace. He said they never told him anything about that we were hanging out, and that they had just gotten the brace from work. Just then, it felt like all of the information I'd gathered in the last year was swirling around me like a whirlwind. This whole time, the blame that I had assigned to Judah belonged to Elm. This person violently hated me without ever having met me and used deceit to earn my trust enough for me to let them into my home. Elm had been actively harassing me for 5 months by the time they reached out and revealed themselves, and the lies continued for 3 more months after that. They had even lied about not being knowledgeable about astrology, so as to not implicate themselves and avoid being caught. Days passed, and the hateful messages stopped suddenly and completely, exposing Elm's guilt beyond a doubt. Judah reached out to me to let me know that him and Elm had separated, and that was the last time I had heard from either of them. I sometimes wonder what could have happened if I hadn't cut our hangout short that day. Maybe I wouldn't really have anything to worry about. Perhaps they were all bark and no bite, but they were clearly hiding some very deep troubles under that excitable facade. So Elm, let's not meet again. And for the love of God, stay out of my anons.